Hello and welcome everybody to Booze Hour Community Edition today. Today I have a very special guest on, Shea Stewart, who I will bring on in just a second here. But before that, just want to go over a couple of things. You might be watching this from LinkedIn right now. You might be watching this from YouTube right now. If you're watching this from LinkedIn, thank you for checking this out. There is actually a YouTube channel that you can subscribe to, which is youtube.com/DarylandBoo. If you head over there, there will be, you can open up this live stream from over there, and then there will be a subscribe button just over here somewhere. Anyways, if you want to hit that, then you'll actually see when I go live in future. The community edition, the Booze Hour type stuff, I live stream to LinkedIn. But some of the stuff that we additionally do, there's a weekly weekly stream that we call Weekly Update that we do every Monday usually, and kind of bring on some interesting guests for shorter, a little bit more off-topic type stuff and some on-topic type stuff on there. That's every Monday, so I encourage you to check that out. If you're watching from YouTube right now and you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button that's down here. You can check me out on LinkedIn as well. You can follow me on there. There's also an audio version of this on Apple, Google, and Spotify. And there's also a mailing list that we do as well for your latest F5 news, and also just keeping up on the show stuff in general. So check that out on DarylandBoo.com if you want to sign up for that. Before I bring on Shea, just wanted to just thank and recognize some of the Booze Hour community partners. So I'm all decked out in my HashiCorp gear and my Okta hat. And Equinix and We Hack Purple are great supporters of the show. So I thank those folks for supporting the show and contributing to it. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Shea Stewart in just a second here. Shea is most recently original founder of consulting firm Arctiq. I'd actually met Shea before that in one of his previous roles, and we can talk a little bit about that. But I find Shea to be a really interesting guy. Every time you, I think you guys will notice, every time you hear him speak, he's a quietly confident person who has really cool opinions on things that I always find intriguing. So I always enjoy talking to him. So without further ado, I will bring on Shea. Shea, how's it going?
Hey, Boo, how you doing? Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for jumping on. First things first, do you recall the first time you ever met me?
I'm thinking, and I was thinking about that before we jumped on backstage. I'm thinking it was probably within the last 6 months of my Scalar duties and tour. It's likely that I had actually possibly, and this may be the way the story lines up, and this is how the worlds blur and align. I think I had actually driven my closest friend and his mother. They were moving out to Victoria, actually, where that I've spent the last couple of years as well, and drove them. They were just moving out there across the country. I kind of stopped in Vancouver because then I just basically made office visits all the way back to sort of justify a little bit of work travel to get me back after that drive. And so I would have met up with you and Daryl when on the first one in the Vancouver office back in the days of Scalar, which is now CDW.
Yeah.
I think
memory.
who were we? Yeah, there was one customer there that we were meeting to. That was, I think, the only, probably really the only real interactions we had at Scalar. I think was around that one customer, and then I shortly after I departed and we started something different.
Yeah. I recall, I'm pretty sure that was actually the case. Actually, I recall a story like that from you. And I recall in that meeting, so this was a number of years back now. We'll get into when you started at Arctiq, started up Arctiq there, but this would have been a number of years back. And we were meeting with a customer, and the context of the meeting was cloud. Customer was talking about, hey, what does cloud look like in general? What does it look like with F5, and what does it look like in general? Conversations that we've always had with customers previous to cloud, or previous to that, talking about cloud, it was kind of like, hey, how do I shove one of these boxes over here? And I recall the rep from Scalar at the time, they're like, okay, you're going to meet Shea. Shea's a really interesting, really knowledgeable guy. And I really think that you guys will like what he has to say. And we're like, okay, cool. If he's at Scalar hires a number of really awesome folks. So really confident in that. And I think the customer started off the conversation with just the typical, hey, how do I move this box over into cloud? And I was struck by you because you kind of took the conversation back. We were like, you were trying to figure out what are you actually trying to do? And I'm going to explain to you exactly how this whole cloud thing is going to work. Because it's not just taking a box and just shoving it up into cloud and then all of a sudden, wipe your hands and you're done. There's a lot more to this. And you kind of took the customer and you made them really think. That customer today has kind of gone down that path of, hey, this cloud is going to look a lot different than just shoving a bunch of boxes out into the public cloud. But that was my first experience with you. And lo and behold, a few months later, you guys created Arctiq, which was kind of taking that approach of, this is what re-architecture and modernization actually looks like. And so it was kind of like a cool teaser almost to kind of get an idea of where you were heading off to. And then all of a sudden you're creating this company and doing really cool things. So I thought that was really cool. But maybe, you were at Arctiq for a little while there. Maybe you can give an intro to yourself, what you were doing before Arctiq, how you got to Arctiq, and how you maybe created Arctiq from there.
Sure. And I remember that customer in the meeting at the time. The conversation from a lot of people was, how do I zip up this box and and upload it to the cloud? And I'm like, okay, well, getting asked the question a lot. So how do we come up with a better answer? And that was sort of the beginnings of Arctiq a little bit. I would say my history's been in the infrastructure game, in the data center side. So I grew up in telecommunication networking to begin with, a company called Infonet. Back in the day, if people who remember them, they did managed sort of WAN services back in the day. And so I do, everything from 64K circuits to T1s to, and then we got into real internet speeds at some point in time. They got acquired by British Telecom. I left. I went and did a small company gig and became what today would be known as, a DevOps engineer. Realistically, I was a sysadmin supporting 10 developers. That was basically the gig. We just didn't have the titles, and this was 2005, 2006. So we weren't really talking about it like that. That was a short and fun gig, and that's when I met a really business partner of mine, best friend, very close person, but he's been my boss for many years. I met Tim and Tim Fairweather, and we were working for a small company called Zentra. And so Zentra was doing both similar in the same game as Scalar. It was data center infrastructure sales and then services that will go along with those sales. So I spent a ton of time doing that. We were there for 4 or 5 years. They sold to the Hirschevek Group. We left, moved into Scalar. That was an extension of the same job in a bigger company, right? I think Zentra was maybe a 40 or 50 person company. Scalar at the time was maybe about 70 or 80. And at the time of my leaving, maybe 300. So they had done a lot of growth and met a ton of fantastic engineers, within that organization, and sales professionals and sort of ops people. I met just a ton of great people. That was a really fun company. But the question that I guess was always kind of sticking in my mind is like, how do I get closer to the application? And I don't know that I fully got there, when we were, kind of what we were doing at Arctiq. I don't even think when we started it, the question was, how do we get closer to the application? But we didn't really know what the work was going to look like. when we started. It was just, 4 people, 5 people starting a company saying, I think we can get some work, and then scaling that type of work from there, which ended up being, sort of app re-architecture based off of infrastructure automation things, right? And that was really what we were known for, was infrastructure automation. So we'd kind of gotten closer, maybe not fully in some cases, but we were doing Kubernetes deployments and OpenShift deployments and things like that before it was kind of happening all over the place. Mm-hmm. And that's how we were trying to get maybe not closer to the application even as much. I think it started to redefine itself as how do we get closer to the developer, right? I'm not a developer by trade. I've done some development, but I'm a glue guy, elevated bash scripts into infrastructure automation tools. You've got a HashiCorp sort of shirt on. I love the tool set there. I don't consider myself a software developer by using those tools. Like, I'm an infrastructure software developer, as one guy, sort of coined it. And I liked that sort of terminology. And so really we were working with sysadmins and trying to help them become infrastructure software developers, which has been a ton of fun. Mostly because you get to sit on the bleeding edge of technology and see what works and see what doesn't, and, get a little bit closer to open source. And I think it's fun to watch how enterprises have adopted all of this in the name of getting closer to the developer, getting more services faster, and so forth.
That's really cool. So when you guys started Arctiq, how you describe it is you guys just kind of came together and maybe had some gigs going. Did you think that you were going to form a real, like, full-bodied company at that point? You just were independent contractors just trying to get together?
No, I think that the company formation was intentional at a certain point. I think we mulled on it for a couple of months, and we all kind of were feeling like we wanted to do something different. And we all have different backgrounds, but starting a company was an intention. But with the five people that started it, all we had to do was just find a little bit of work. I don't think we actually hired the first employee until probably 7 or 8 months in, is my best guess. Mm-hmm. That was 5 years ago, but I think that's about right. And then you get to learn all those other things, about being a business owner, which is different than being sort of an independent consultant.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that as well. I'm also wondering, when you started the company and you were kind of heading down this path, how did you know that you were going down the right path? Like, you were finding you're on bleeding edge technology. Sometimes people make investments in learning all that kind of stuff, and then that technology is old at this point and not used anymore. How did you guys know that you were heading down the right path?
I think the key to I think it was quite simple. We followed the work. So I don't want to make it like it was like we sat out on a drawing board and said, here's the vision of how we find the right technology and the wrong technology. That's not exactly the way I think most people, they can't see that far ahead because, disruption happens all the time. But we follow the work. In a lot of organizations, a lot of our customers, a lot of the people you work with, they hedge their bets on technology all the time. They implement something, they test it out, they kick the tires, figure out if it works or doesn't work for their organization. And we were part of that process, right? As somebody who could come in and help them through complex technology adoption to figure out how far it should go with them. But I think the key was leveraging our networks and our partnerships to help bring us the work. Because really the internal term at the time was kind of coined like no sales. Like, we didn't really have salespeople. We weren't really selling anything aside from services. That's all we were doing. And the work was being brought to us by partners. Like, at the time, Red Hat was probably our biggest one. So we were subcontracted to do a lot of Red Hat work, which allowed us to focus on the technology and not have to focus so much on sourcing the work. And then, so that sort of expanded with a number of different partnerships as well through the other technology ecosystem like HashiCorp and Google. And, it changed over the years, but the work was landing on our doorstep. So I don't know that often we said, is this the wrong technology, right? If somebody kind of said, hey, should you really be doing Kubernetes deployments? What if Nomad takes off? It's like, well, if it does, then our customers will ask for it. And if they ask for it, we will learn it. And that was more just the attitude of the organization. It's like, if it's important enough to you, we will help you learn the technology and do that journey with you.
Yeah, very cool. A couple comments here. from Sebastian. Likes my hat,
It's a
and
nice
also,
hat.
yeah, Shea is a rock star. Thanks, Sebastian.
Yeah, it's too kind. I am not a rock star. I've never been on stage in a musical format in any way, shape, or form. But hey, maybe if I get good at deep fakes or something, we can figure something out.
Yeah, exactly. I have oh, it's covered up here. I have my guitar in the background here. A few people have asked me to play it at this point and have called me out because I don't know how to play guitar, but
So
it
it
looks nice in the
just sits
background.
back there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice contrast, right? Like it's
Yeah.
generally a blank wall. There's, a cloud there, so representing technology, so it kind of have a little bit of art in a sense with the guitar there. But yeah, serves no purpose other than decoration right now.
I've been learning a little bit of guitar in my my recent downtime, as I say. I've been taking a few months of sort of downtime and relaxation, and I found the Musician app to be kind of fun for somebody like myself who had never played guitar. It's like it's kind of got this Guitar Hero feel to it, but it's legit. Like it just actually uses your microphone and actually tells you whether you're doing something right or wrong, and it's kind of guided lessons. It's been pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. I'll have to try that out. I've seen some demos of it before, and it looks almost too good to be true.
It's one way. It's one way to learn something, and for me, for something I've never used before, it's been useful.
Yeah, cool. That's awesome. So I wanted to kind of get into early days of your startup. Last week we had on an entrepreneur and startup founder as well, and actually a couple of the folks that I'll be having on in the next couple of weeks here will also be working in startups as well. So just a common theme that's come up, I guess. But in the early days of Arctiq, you said, you guys didn't hire somebody for 7 months or so. How did you know it was the time to hire? Was it just, hey, we got enough work that we can't, we're working 12 hours a day already, so we're going to fork off a little bit of this work to somebody else? Or how'd that go?
I think there was a lot of learning through the years of how to measure workload, right? So I don't think we had a good finger on the pulse of the workload at the time, so much as, you can roughly gauge that we have enough business to pay ourselves. And, the cash flow also shows us that we have enough business to maybe pay somebody else, right? And then the right person comes along. And I think that was one way that we always thought about hiring people at Arctiq at the time anyways, was about attitude and aptitude. And you couldn't put a job description out there for somebody that says, hey, I want somebody who's got Kubernetes or OpenShift experience, right? Like 10 years Kubernetes, right? We see that all the time nowadays, which still blows my mind because it's not that old. But we weren't looking for that because we knew it wasn't going to be there. We had to learn that stuff when we started the organization. So it was really about human network. On all of our sales side, it was human networking, and also through sort of staff and things like that as well. Frankly, because it's somebody we trusted threw us a name of somebody and said, hey, this person might be a good fit. They're just coming out of school or whatever the story is. And it's somebody we had already respected, right? Or like that was how the introduction was made. So that's when we started to say, okay, well, we have the financial bandwidth to handle this, and there's 5 of us, so we can handle the coaching side of this. We're not overloading ourselves by adding somebody to the team. And when we've got enough time to work with them, because they're going to have to learn it, they have to ramp up, and that proved to be a fantastic approach. We had a bit of a hiring process that helped vet out their attitude and aptitude more than anything else, and that's how we would bring people into the organization. And we tried to do that with all hires. Kind of had to undergo that level of sort of the interview process, if you will, which was project-based attitude, aptitude type thing, just to see if we could work with the person and to let other people in the organization meet them and just kind of see what kind of person they are, because you're going to be working with this person every day. We wanted to make sure it was a good fit. And particularly with him, I think the first time, his task or his mission was to actually take some free training. So we offered to sign them up for some training. The same course I had to take at the exact same time. Actually, it was like the product's dead now, but it was a CloudForms advanced coding course, which is all sort of Ruby on Rails and how to customize CloudForms, which at the time was kind of the idea of your central cloud broker for an organization. And if you can figure that out, then we were like, okay, you're, not ever having seen this before, if you can sort it out by the end of the week, you're the kind of person we want to work with. And that was it. And they had started, that was Daniel, and he had started, I think, at the end of December or the beginning of January. I can't remember the exact time frame, but it was awesome and great to have him on the team. And he's been a fantastic technical leader, and just continues to grow by such leaps and bounds. I'm just amazed.
Very cool. I've heard you talk about it before, but maybe you can talk through it here. Is how you guys have a bit of a more of a flat org structure. You want people to be able to manage themselves. You give people autonomy, hand them tasks. You just expect them to be done, and it's not like one person's managing everybody down. Maybe you can talk to a little bit of that and how that's attributed to the growth.
Yeah, and I want to put a bit of a disclaimer on here. I'm no longer with Arctiq, and so I can't, I don't know. I don't think, I doubt that's how it's being run today. But and I can't really speak on anything about today. I can say that for a period of time, what the direction we went down was kind of a natural evolution of those smaller startups that you have, where you're like, nobody really wants to be a boss, and so. We had sought out, and Tim and our organization had sought out this organizational structure underneath something called Holocracy, which is it's a slightly different organizational structure. There's still accountability, right? And there's still sort of authority, but those are attached to elements of the business. So humans can fulfill a role that has accountability or authority to get something done within that business or for the business. And that's really to structure the business around what it needs to operate versus the human that's fulfilling the role. And so you don't have traditional role titles like chief technology officer or software developer. Maybe there's a software development role, but a human may fulfill multiple roles in the organization depending on how the accountabilities are sort of carved up. The idea there is to allow decision making to happen in a more distributed, sort of authoritative way, so that it's being done by the people who are doing the work and not necessarily flowing up the chain to somebody who makes a decision who doesn't actually have the context, right? And so you need to be mindful about where you put authority and how you restrict authority within the organization underneath this model. It was definitely interesting way to run an organization. I liked a lot of the mechanics of it. I think the idea was to promote more openness and to allow everybody to have a voice, and to allow change to happen from anywhere within the organization, because every human is a sensor. They sense things that maybe not working as well as they could be. And so it kind of built all of those mechanics to help that, to help those sorts of issues get brought up and dealt with in a very fast and meaningful way. I don't know that I don't think we implemented it perfectly. I definitely know we didn't. It's like a continuous sort of learning game. And I don't know that it worked for all people within the organization. I think it's a bit of a kind of wild and out there sort of notion, but there are other companies that do run on this model, and it does help you scale to a certain size. It probably also theoretically has some limits on how big it can actually go within an organization. And I think you see that sort of in other practitioners as well. But it was interesting, and it was a really good way to separate the humans from what the business needed to operate. The roles that, the business is nothing more than a system. And so you're just kind of trying to continuously optimize the system, try to do that without the humans that are in the way, and try to learn what the business needs first, and then set that in, and then worry about who's going to fulfill the needs, right? I think that was kind of the way we thought about it.
That is interesting. Actually, when you say the business is just a system, we've probably all seen before consultants who start up working on their own. They pick up contracts and whatnot. They try to scale from there, and maybe they get to one other person, or maybe not, and they don't manage to scale. And you guys managed to scale a services-based company to the size that it was when you exited. How do you know how you would attribute that? Is it because you turned services, the business of services, into a system? Is some other stuff that you would attribute to how that scaled up?
Yeah, again, so understanding and treating it like a system allows you to work on those different parts that need to be serviced, right? Like, hey, if intake is becoming a challenge, then if you're talking about it all the time and reviewing that part of the system, then you'll identify that there's a problem, and then you will throw your energy at that problem. So think about like, oh, sales are kind of low for the next little while, right? And I said we didn't do sales, but we needed intake. What are we going to do? Who are we going to call? Right? You start sort of targeting there. Oh, delivery is getting a bit overloaded, or it's low. What are we doing there? Why are our projects stuck? Right? What's going on in this piece of the system? Almost value streaming a little bit, sort of the way it operates. But I still think the scalability was all network driven. And I really mean that, like, the 5 people that started Arctiq were diversified in their skill set, right? So between sort of operational insights, sales and relationships, and then sort of technical delivery, we all rounded each other out pretty well and all had different unique viewpoints. So it wasn't just 2 independent consultants, delivering on projects who had no idea about how to actually collect money, right? That's important that you learn how to collect money from your customers and chase them and do AR and all those things you probably don't want to do. Or handle HR functions, or the things you don't think about when an organization starts. Who's going to sort out benefits? When can we offer benefits? When are people going to want that? Like all those types of things, getting loans, right? Or whatever you need to facilitate the business. We were all really well-rounded, which I think helped, right? And then after that, it was the scalability happened through the networks. That was either people coming to join the team, and these are people either that we sought out after a period of time, people we knew in our networks, or people that were, brought to us. If we had more delivery bench, we hunted more projects. We also had a massive amount of network relationships on the sales or the intake side, right? And so, so like Mike and Kyle at the time would just kind of drum down the doors of Red Hat was the big one, and a lot of work was coming in through that side. And we'd also pursue some direct work, and then also, Google work later on, and all of that was just relationship driven. So that's how the scale happened, was all human networking and delivering good, high quality work, making customers happy. But the thing about services, as some people would say, is you're only good as your last project or your last few projects. So we did want to make sure that we maintained high sort of caliber of delivery as well, and within the organizations that we delivered on.
Oh, very cool. You know what? We're almost at 1:30. Are you good to keep going for a little bit? I know we have a few other subjects we're going to touch on.
Yeah, I am. If you are, yeah.
Okay, cool. One other subject on the on constructing your business. Then, when you were at Arctiq, there's the notion of working on your business and working in your business. How did you find yourself spending your time, and what did you prefer?
It's interesting because that is directly a Holocracy sort of term, and there's actually structures in there on how to work on or in your business. And so it's funny that either you picked that up through Holocracy or it's just a general known thing. Which did I prefer? I don't know. I don't think I had a preferred. I enjoyed both for different reasons. I like working in the business because I liked doing what we like doing, like delivering technical projects and solving challenges for customers. And I've been well known for spending a lot of my time with the BC government. So I take a lot of joy or pride or just satisfaction. It fills my cup to work on projects that are like that, because I can actually see some tangible benefit down to the citizen. I see applications getting used by the public. And I think that to me is stuff that I seek out. But then the other side of that, and the other element of, if I'm going to say filling my cup again, the things that bring me joy out of work is watching people grow within their own world within the organization, and them making it better, and them finding their roles, and doing that sort of coaching aspect to help them nail down their own path. And I took an immense amount of joy out of that too, right? There were, I think, a lot of fantastic team members in the Arctiq team, and I really enjoyed working with all of them and watching them grow as we kind of tried to push them a little bit outside of the boundaries.
Yeah, very cool.
So both.
That's awesome. So one of the other subjects that we wanted to get into as well, and the thought of having you on here was actually from listening to another podcast that you were on, and you talked a lot about
Mm-hmm.
mental health. And at that time, it was something that was going through my head a lot
Mm-hmm.
as well, because at least from my perspective, we're all at home now. I mean, I worked from home primarily before, but I was actually out interacting a lot with folks, and now I'm at home all the time. All the distractions that come with being at home full time. You had talked about some of the mental health things that you guys had actually done pre-COVID or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the retreats that you had done, or
Mm-hmm.
we can take this whatever direction you want, but maybe we can talk a little bit about how that was approached with you, maybe how that affected you or the business, or maybe the retreat that you guys, or that I think you do annually.
Sure. So I'll first sort of start by saying that whatever I talk about is from mental health is from my own experience, right? And so I won't divulge anything from anybody else, or sort of handle sort of how it affects the business, mostly because I can just talk about how I felt it affected me. In focusing on mental health, both from either sharing my experiences with other people to help potentially provide options for them to maybe deal with or find alternative ways to deal with their own stress, or as just part of my own journey. I think I grew up in a way of working that I didn't really know how to do anything else but work for a long period of time, and so that was a lot of just working too much, creating this sort of high stress sort of mode for myself, generating a lot of anxiety and that type of thing that sort of underscored a lot of my life that I really wasn't aware of or in tune with, or I just knew the physical reaction. I didn't really know the mental reaction or what was happening. And so I guess a couple of years ago, or maybe 2 or 3, I sort of started to seek out, a little bit more more questions and answers around mental health and what it was going to mean to me for the next period of my life. I kind of knew what I was dealing with before, but like, how could I change some of the stuff that I just didn't like behaviorally? And that kind of led down 2 different paths. One of the paths was down, sort of a bit of the light study of Buddhism and meditation, and sort of just slowing down in life. And that kind of led me across to Thailand, and I did a silent meditation retreat for about a week, which provided all sorts of very tangible benefits to me personally, and was very challenging. And I got a lot of that, but simultaneously,
I've heard of those. Not to interrupt you, I've heard of those before. That is like, you go to the retreat and you don't talk at all until you exit.
Until you exit, yeah. And that was a very interesting experience. There are a number of them. Canada actually has a few locations where, if you're not looking to do that huge trip, then there are places in Canada you can go. It takes a little while to get booked in because they're free, and they should be free. Donation based, so like you can donate on your way out and to help support it, but it's intended to be free. And there's a few in the island, and I think they're wonderful things to do, but they are, in fact, you don't talk at all. There are some rules that are laid out. You've got some chores to do every day. There's a pretty regimented schedule throughout the whole day, and a lot of it is learning, right? So there are teachers there to teach you about. This was specifically sort of an intro to Buddhism and meditation. I can tell you that one of the most interesting experiences was when we were allowed to speak. We were still at the sort of the retreat center, and like, I still couldn't for a while. There was just so much. It's like everybody was, there was maybe 20, 25 people there, and everybody was so just waiting to kind of let go of all that energy. It was too much energy for me, because I'm fairly, I toe the line between 50% introvert, 50% extrovert, and that too was just too much energy coming out of the gate for me, and I just kind of had to like absorb it, but I just had nothing to let out of my system until I was able to get into smaller, sort of more focused conversations with the folks that you've just spent 6 days with that you know nothing about. And so that was a really interesting experience, was talking to people you've been sitting in a room and sharing dorms and whatever that you've never spoken to, after 6 days of not speaking to them and then having conversations with them, you've made up all sorts of judgments and guesses in your mind about who they are, where they're from, and you got most of them wrong, right?
Oh, really?
What do they sound like, right? Yeah. It's pretty cool.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, sorry for taking you down that detour there.
No, for those that can stand it, I think I encourage them to try it. For those who think they can't, I definitely encourage them to try it. It's hard to do 7 days for anybody, so you could probably start with 3, but I found that it took about 3 days of the retreat alone, and because you're disconnected from no cell phone, no laptop, no nothing, right? And so I think it took about 3 days just to slow down enough to really start to sink into it. And I think that's what people are trying to seek out, is that level of just to disconnect from technology for 3 days is a pretty, I think, worthwhile thing for people to do.
So, I mean, when you're there, do you find there's just one point where you just hit some sort of nirvana and you're like, okay, I'm calm now, or my mind is emptied now, or something like that?
I wouldn't consider it hitting. For me, there was no point of hitting nirvana in my meditation or otherwise. And many people I've talked to have shared that they don't have a similar experience. I don't think there's one point or one moment. I think there is a time that you start to notice. It's really the whole point of meditation is just to notice what your mind is doing. It's not to be involved in what it's doing. It's to notice what it's doing. That's how you're kind of stepping back a little bit in the third person sense. And then you can kind of watch the games that it plays, which is kind of entertaining. But I think there's a point when you get to become more curious, right? And so, for example, if my brain is thinking about something at work, maybe you start to go, why am I worried about this right now? What is causing that underlying anxiety about this thing? What am I physically feeling? Am I worried? If I'm worried, why am I worried? What's the root cause of that? And to be a little bit more curious and to be able to watch the mind allows you to kind of step out of things like actual anxious feelings. So for me, a lot of this was actually a result of trying to deal with some anxiety that I had experienced in my 20s. And then I sort of had hit again a couple of years ago. And I was directly trying to combat the anxiety and trying to learn more about it.
I got a question from one of my coworkers, Shannon, here. Are you just overwhelmed when you come back to your tech after?
I actually don't think I was overwhelmed at the time. I think I was able to look at everything and kind of push it away. I almost was just fighting coming back, though, a little bit, right? You kind of have to have this slow drip of the technology, and you need to be a little bit conscious. But because the whole thing is about watching what you're doing, you may start to see the things speed up. And I saw that over a period of time, like, oh, my hand is picking up my phone and opening Instagram, and I don't know why. But then because you're still sort of in that bit of a slow gear, you start to ask yourself why, and then you might just put it back down and kind of leave it away or get it out of your sight, or for me, start to make rules and be okay with not having checked your phone in a couple of hours. And I know that frustrated a number of my friends and family to a certain degree, but I grew up in a time when we had to stick our finger in a rotary phone, right? And when the human wasn't there, you just left a voicemail. You left a voicemail, and they called you the next day, or if they had an answering machine. Yeah. So a lot of that, I had to kind of fight actively against some of those tendencies, because those did start to come back because it was natural, but I was still a little bit more aware of them. But I was in a much slower state of mind than I am today, right? And so today I still notice sometimes when I pick up my phone, I'm like, oh, why is this here? I'm going to put this back down and go for a walk.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool. Sorry, we took a detour there. So you're going through, done a retreat, added some more things to your repertoire?
Yeah, there was something a little bit different that I had done. And I had been listening to this podcast for a while, which struck me up with a group called the Everyman Group, which is not a men's rights group. I want to make that very clear. It's some people start to hear it. There are men's rights groups, which are a totally different thing. And that's not what this is. This is a group that is meant to talk about and teach sort of emotional literacy for men. And they have since crossed over and do some co-ed things as well. And Dan Doty, who's sort of the big spokesman of that and sort of the big face of it, continues to do a bunch of amazing work there and work with other groups who do this similarly for women or other types of open and inclusive groups as well. But he just started with men because that's what he understood. And you know, he had sort of grown up by taking young boys who were struggling at home or whatever and teaching them sort of vital life skills out in the woods. And so this followed this similar pattern where they have a couple of retreat options, you know, and one of them was a 3-day sort of retreat, and one of them was a week-long thing as well. And we did that one in Montana, which was outdoor hiking with dudes you don't know, in the right size of group, learning how to slow down and talk about emotion and feel emotion and talk about what we actually want, and for ourselves and for other people in our families and our lives, and to just make space, you know, for that. And it's a pretty powerful thing. And I think it teaches some really helpful skills, and plus you get to go camping. So, I mean, that's pretty fun too. But those retreats were very transformative for myself, for sure.
Do you still go on those?
Not anymore. I think we're trying to do some local. I mean, they've gone fully virtual because of COVID for now. What they do, their whole organization is about also supporting people who want to start local groups. And those local groups are really just about, you meet every Monday, get in your group of whatever, 5 or 6 people, and just talk about and hold each other accountable for the things that you said you were going to do or wanted to do. And I've got a good friend who leads one of the Toronto groups there, and we're still trying to do some stuff here where we just take some guys out, go canoeing, go camping, that sort of thing. But I've not been as connected with it recently as I'd like to be.
Yeah. Another comment from Shannon here. Sounds like we all need to take this retreat. I mean, when I heard it, I was like, this sounds perfect, because my wife would be one to say that I have no emotions, and I need to learn what they are. So that sounds cool.
Yeah, I think we all grow up in different environments in terms of what that means to us, and we're all grown up with different versions of what it means to be a man, right? And whatever that means. If that's, I've heard those words when I grew up. It maybe meant something to me differently to somebody else, or we were told to man up, or a number of these different things that were both could have been positive, but also could have been negative, and things that we internalized and sort of held our emotions inside because it wasn't good to show them, or whatever sort of family environment you grew up in. And this is intended to provide a safe space where we can explore what that means. And I think it's really transformational for a lot of people. I would say that the podcast, the Everyman podcast, is pretty good. I listened to it for a long time before getting out there, so I had a pretty good idea of what I was getting myself into. Some other people showed up for the first time, and they had really not much of an idea of what they were getting into, and it was a bit of a shock for them. But I think they all had some benefit out the other side of it. I know it was emotionally draining, like mega draining to do the event, but well worth it.
Yeah, I can only imagine it probably lasts like 5 minutes before I'd be curled up into a ball or something like that.
I'm in my own experience, and I'm happy to share this. Like the first night we did a 3-weekend one where you go to this retreat or resort. It was up in I think Virginia, and this was actually just before I was going to go do a demo on stage at Google Next. Mm-hmm. And so this was here I went and unloaded a 3-day emotional barrel. And within the first sort of real get together, you kind of have dinner first, and then you go into this barn, and then you have this experience. Well, my experience is like kind of in a room with 60 dudes, and you start kind of moving about, and then you start sort of, you're in front of somebody face to face, inches from their face, and saying something to the lines of starting a sentence, these A-B lines saying, if you really knew me, you'd know that. And then for 30 seconds, I got to fill that void, right? And then the next person says it. And it's an interesting trick because it's actually closer to 45 seconds or a minute, because the first 30 seconds you fill with stuff that I could tell Boo, who doesn't know, yeah, I love to cyclocross. I love swimming. and then you start to run out of the generic things to say. And then you dig a little deeper and you're like, oh, if you really knew me, you'd know that I feel like my friends kind of judge me all the time. And like, all of a sudden you start to like, this is the first person I've done this with, and I'm eye to eye. And this dude and myself are both crying at the end of that sort of first thing. And that just cracks it open. Allows everybody to kind of have their own experience. So it's powerful is how I would describe it.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, you mentioned that you're, 50% introvert, 50% extrovert. A lot of people in there kind of similar. Did you have a bunch of extroverts as well, or?
All over the place. I couldn't count it. It was everything across the board. I will not ever see probably 95% or 98% of those people again. Maybe that's where the safety is. Definitely everything from military people to, the homemakers, right? And all across the board. So.
Well, that's interesting. And so how do you think this has applied now to, how you interact at work? Where there's things immediately you came back to work and were like, okay, I can do something better now that I've done this?
I think a couple things. It made me a little bit more aware and willing to talk more openly about mental health at work or emotional states, or just to say what I was feeling. Because quite often just by saying what you're feeling allows you to not react, right? You're trying to create, and there are a lot of parallels with Buddhism here too, right? When you're trying to create space between the thing that happened and the way you respond to that thing or the way you react to that thing. And that space allows me to respond and not react. And so a lot of that skill, or even just being able to identify or slow down and identify a physical emotion, right? Because there are physical ways your body tells you what you're feeling, and inquire about it, might give me enough time to not immediately fire off that sort of heated response if I was thinking in a heated way, right? Or excited or whatever. And I could provide more substance to my emotion, and I could also distance myself a little bit from it. So that sort of skill and the ability to ask other people how they're feeling and make it, safe to say, how are you feeling about this? But like, really, how are you actually feeling? How does it physically, like, how does it really make you feel? It's like, well, actually, I'm kind of stressed. Okay. How is that coming out? What else is happening? And then you can really start to get your team to understand that it's okay to have emotions with a lot of work as well. Startup life is highs and lows, right? There's a lot of work. Then you might go dip a little bit. Then there might be a lot more work. It might seem overwhelming. So we need to be able to discuss, in my opinion, the emotions that go along with that if we're going to coach people through it.
And this was all prior to COVID, I guess.
This was all prior to COVID. This was this is what COVID does to you. I can tell if there was a year gap or if it was only like 6 months. It might have only been 6 months. It was kind of like the September, October timeframe for the last retreat. And I think the summer before COVID, or a year before COVID, was my Thailand trip.
Okay. So, I mean, COVID comes around. How do you think this has affected things, maybe personally for you, and also not specific to any one person, but maybe across industry, things that you've observed for mental health?
Yeah, I think, well, I would say the last couple of years, I've witnessed a lot more conversations about mental health in the workplace, which I think is really good and powerful. I remember listening to some of the older DevOps Cafe podcasts, and they were talking a lot about it then, but it wasn't really being widely talked about in the industry. But like, burnout is a real thing, and suicide via burnout or as a result of burnout is a real thing. And these are things that are difficult to talk about, but by talking about them, you might be able to prevent them. And so the last couple of years, there's definitely been more focus on people asking the question and what it means. And I've seen workplaces adapt this way as well. And I know that through even through my own dealings in my own organization, there are alternative benefits providers that can provide different types of services for an organization, which I think is really, really cool. The types of services that allow you to book online counseling or yoga classes or whatever through their system that the company pays for. It's at a flat rate, and so the employee doesn't need to burden that cost. Because I remember one of the first things I did was when I was exploring all of this, I also got into talk therapy, and I'd never had a therapist before in my life, but by talking about it with other people, it kind of reduced the stigma. And I went ahead and did that, and then realized our own benefits package covered about 4 sessions. And in talk therapy, 4 sessions is about as much as you need to figure out whether you like the person or not, whether there's going to be benefit there. And so I think some of these alternative providers of alternative sort of benefit services, or even just talking about it more in the workplace, which we've seen across all of our, all customer bases and everything else, is really good. As long as we don't talk it out of, I guess we don't go too far with it. And by going too far, it's just like, well, we all still have jobs to do, and we want to provide all the services that are available to everybody to both do their jobs well and with full energy. And that means if you are struggling with any sort of issues, we want those to be handled, because we want you productive and happy, and we want everybody to be in that state. But we still have jobs to do too, which is the hard line in a smaller organization is you have to balance both getting that work done. And if somebody can't deliver the work because of some issue, then somebody else has to pick up on that task. And that's why you need to be emotionally supportive, so that you kind of have this family unit approach to getting the task done within the business.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess the other thing I'd say with COVID specifically was I had a lot of customers in the government sector, and I watched a lot of their management plans include mental health checks. Some of them quite rigid, I would say. And some of them a good attempt, but maybe not far enough. And some of them actually providing and talking about other services that people can use that are, with full discretion and everything else. And I think that the latter is what we want to talk about. But everybody did, like businesses put it into their rule book that you had to start checking in on employees, not to make sure they were working, but to make sure they were okay. Because frankly, I think a lot of people just sat at their desks all day, and after 12 hours, you forgot to leave because you rolled out of your bed, you came over to your desk, you forgot to put on pants, right? You're still wearing pajamas or whatever. And the whole day could go by and you forgot to eat or whatever. And I think businesses had to tackle with that as a result of everybody working from home that maybe weren't quite used to it.
Yeah. I mean, not only that, but from an F5 perspective, I was dealing with a lot of people that basically had to pivot their business like overnight. Like hey, all of a sudden, first of all, if you're internal IT, you have to take thousands of employees and they got to work from home, and you got to figure out how they're going to work.
The VPN,
it's a VPN issue now. And then number 2, hey, our revenue model was in-store sales, and now we have to figure out how we're going to transact business without our retail storefronts now. And so I think so much pressure was. I watched so many people under a lot of pressure to help their business, whereas I think before a lot of IT, well, not all IT, but a lot of IT was keeping lights on, keeping certain services working. And probably for you guys, though, with more modern infrastructures, you're probably dealing with parts of the business that were actually driving the business forward. But all of a sudden, all these people that were supporting IT as a business or didn't support IT as a business were thrown into, hey, this is the business now. We need to use technology to move us forward. And you could see a lot of people just up all night. I would get emails all times of the day looking for license keys and whatnot to get the business running. I think there was a lot of stress for a few months there. And luckily, I didn't see a lot of crashing and burning, but I can imagine there could have been some stuff happening in the background.
Yeah, I think what I witnessed within our organization, because we were generally working on projects that fell into 2 categories. We were either helping grow or sustain our already platforms that already had sort of momentum, right? So they're already doing their transformation. They've got this platform, and there's a place for people to land. And so they were dealing with a demand problem, and their demand problem was everybody else who's just trying to keep the lights on all of a sudden needs to pivot, and here's the platform to pivot to, which presents its own operational challenges because it wasn't built to take on all of like that sort of rush, the same way that, you know, the customer who built infrastructure for 100 VPN connections because, you know, their staff is 1/10, whatever, right? Now they got to build their infrastructure to handle 1,000. Okay, that's a whole different challenge, right? So I think there were operational challenges with some of that business that we had. Some of the other business that existed was a lot of proof of concepts and things like that, right? So we saw a massive lulling of that for a period of time, and it makes sense that a lot of organizations would say, "Hey, these are all partially experimental. Like we don't have this slated to go into production this year. Our business needs to now focus on run rate, and so keep the lights on." So then a lot of projects that were sort of advancing the business would pause for a few months while they sort of got everything else sorted out, which included the, you know, IT ops and all the stuff they needed to do to support their business pivot. And then they came back in full force with, okay, we need to move faster now that we've kind of paused that for a bit. We need to get everything back on the rails. And so then a lot of those sort of modernization projects came right back after about the first quarter.
Very cool. We are almost at 2:00. We've gone double time on this one. I knew it would go pretty quick, but we have blown through that first half hour, and we burned another half hour here. So I won't keep you past the 1 hour point. But you know, right now, just things that you're up to right now. You're taking some time off. Your partner has exited from Arctiq. You've got some time on your hands. It sounds like you're spending your time outdoors, and the weather is getting great out there in Ontario. So people should follow you on LinkedIn, Twitter, or whatnot to kind of keep what you're going to be doing next.
Yeah, I would say Twitter at Stewart Shea. If you're looking for generally things around, I don't know, hiking, camping, that sort of stuff around Ontario right now seems to be what I'm mostly doing right now. Or, you know, I got to buy a tractor soon. That's the kind of life I'm living now, which is kind of fun. And you know, we're working on some new stuff. I'm not yet really settled on exactly what it is, but I'm pretty excited to having the opportunity to sort of look at the landscape, take a few months, kind of slow down a little bit, and then see what new problems have been built over the last few years and how we can sort of build something totally new and different for that space. And so we're slowly working at that, and I'm pretty excited about that as well. So
awesome. Going to be excited to see what you brew up next. I know it's going to be good, whatever it is. Thank you very much, Shea, for jumping on.
Thank you.
Anybody who wants to keep an eye on these live streams, if you're not already, follow me on LinkedIn. They'll get streamed out to here and also to YouTube as well, youtube.com/SterlinBoo. Thank you very much, Shea. Next week, I'm taking the week off. Next week is F5 Agility Conference, and so I'll be tied up with that. And then I'll have a few more folks for the next few weeks after that. So stay tuned for that.
Awesome.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye now.